Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, Episode 73.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 74 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Today's sponsor is sellmorefirearms.com, where you get a free 10-step guide to use Facebook to sell more firearms at your FFL or sporting goods store. So head over to sellmorefirearms.com, enter your email address, and we will send you that free guide. I'd like to invite you guys to head over to iTunes or whatever podcatcher you're using to listen to this and leave a review. 5-star review really helps us reach our goal of reaching 1 million gun owners before April of 2019. We've just broken the 10,000 mark, so quite a ways to go, but we're making really good progress. So if you guys could help us out, head over to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever you're listening to this on and write a review, and then share on your social media platforms. Share with your email contacts, let them know about this podcast. And let's see, today's guest is Jay Factor. This is Jay's 4th appearance on this show, and this episode is a little longer than normal. Last time we had Jay on, I split it into 3 episodes, and I thought I would do that again, but I decided I'm just going to leave this go. In this episode, we talked about New Jersey arms smugglers and how they helped with the revolution. And now here's Jay.
Jay Factor, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be back.
Great. So Jay, you told us you had some information about some guys from New Jersey that smuggled arms during the Revolutionary War. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, the last time we talked, I threw in a little teaser about the founders would not adhere to the Sicardy rule. And I think since we've spoken, I think we can throw in there the mag ban, or you could throw in the 10-round mag limit as well. And so I'm not so sure it's New Jersey guys in particular. It's all guys. And I think one of the things that the listeners need to do before they finish with the podcast, if I was listening right now, I would get on Google Scholar and type in District of Columbia v. Heller and pull it up. And then I would go into the upper right-hand corner and hit find and type in St. George Tucker. Tucker's cited 16 times in Heller. And I would read, and in those 16 times, they're not all pure citations. Some are just mentions. And I think you can divide Tucker up evenly between the majority in Heller and the dissent. So both the majority in Heller go to Tucker as an authority for their opinion, and the dissent goes to Tucker for an authority for being against the decision in Heller. So Tucker is extremely influential. We'll get to him a little later, but just so you know, like how something like this starts. Years ago, I was a house framer, and I got called in to do strange jobs at times. And one of the jobs I got called in to do was in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And there was a militia, I think he was a colonel in the militia, lived in Scotch Plains. And I don't remember the guy's name now, but he's got a whole street named after him. And he had a barn. And the New Jersey Historical Commission went in and hired a barn company from Vermont to come in and take apart this guy's barn piece by piece, send it back to Vermont, and make this barn whole again, basically what they did. So a year later, the barn comes back on a truck, and I get hired to set the steel and frame the floors and the interior and exterior walls inside this barn frame. I mean, this is a real job. You can't injure the barn or anything. But the main house was all fieldstone, And as the general contractor is digging up the basement walls from the outside and the inside at the same time, and I guess what they were doing was they're jacking the main house up to put a footing under it, because I think in those days they just started to pile fieldstone up as a basement wall, and there was no footing. So the main house from the 1700s is now sinking. But remember, this guy's a colonel in the New Jersey militia. So as these guys are digging, they find like 27 cannonballs buried in this guy's basement. So, it's interesting because we're always told, the first interesting thing is one of the biggest anti-gun arguments that we hear all the time is, I suppose the Second Amendment gives you the right to carry a bazooka, right? Have you heard that one?
Yep.
And it might not be a bazooka. It might be a F-16, right? It might be a tank. But you hear them all, right?
Right. Yeah.
But this guy's a militia colonel, a New Jersey militia colonel, and this is Union County. And he's got cannonballs buried in his basement. Well, why does he have cannonballs buried in his basement? Well, because obviously he didn't adhere to the king's rules. And we'll get to that as we go on. But I think one of the things that we need to understand is that the Second Amendment, as we know it, was a reaction to things that began to happen in 1775. So on May 6, 1775, there's a letter from Lord Dartmouth to Lord Dunmore, and they issue a useless proclamation forbidding the election of delegates to the Continental Congress. So Lord Dartmouth sends a letter to Governor William Franklin, who's New Jersey's royal governor. Okay, now William Franklin is Ben Franklin's son. Ben Franklin, everybody thinks Ben Franklin's a Pennsylvania guy. Ben Franklin also worked for the state of New Jersey. He was our representative, I believe, with England at the time, 1775. So Dartmouth sends Franklin a letter expressing the king's anxiety over the Congress in Philadelphia. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit, and the letter of Congress is dated in late September 1774. Dartmouth writes, quote, "I must not omit this opportunity of expressing to you how great concern it is given the king to find his subjects in the different colonies in North America have been induced upon the grounds stated in their different resolutions to nominate deputies to meet in General Congress at Philadelphia." So up until that time, they were 13 independent colonies. Georgia didn't talk to Virginia. Virginia didn't talk to Massachusetts. Massachusetts didn't talk to New Jersey. Everybody was kind of fine the way things were going because Georgia had their own products to sell to England and make money. Virginia had their own products to sell to make money in England. New Jersey had their own products to sell, and so did Massachusetts. So everybody was making money. Everybody was happy. 42 days later, so the king contacts Dartmouth, Lord Dartmouth. Dartmouth sends a letter to Franklin saying the king's upset because the Continental Congress met. 42 days later, William Franklin's recipient of a circular letter from the Earl of Dartmouth to all the governors in America relative to arresting and securing any gunpowder, arms, and ammunition. The letter reads like this: "His Majesty having thought fit, by his order in council this day, to prohibit exportation from Great Britain of gunpowder or any sort of arms or ammunition, I herewith enclose to you a copy of the order, and it is His Majesty's command that you take the most effectual measures for arresting, detaining, and securing any gunpowder or any sort of arms or ammunition which may be attempted to be imported into the province under your government, unless the master of the ship having such military stores on board shall produce a license from His Majesty or the Privy Council for the exportation of the same from some of the ports of his kingdom." So basically what happens is Lord Dartmouth relayed to Governor Franklin that the king believed that the Continental Congress was of doubtful legality. So he views our representatives to the Continental Congress, which is Stephen Crane, John DeHart, James Kinsey, William Livingston, and Richard Smith. And for lack of a better word, the king looks at these guys as insurgents, right? And why are they insurgents? Nothing more than they went and had a meeting. And it wasn't that they had a meeting with each other. It was that they had a meeting with the other colonies, okay? They went and met, let's say, Patrick Henry. So the established government of the time, which is England, the founding fathers are rebels against authority and leadership. They're also what the king considers an illegal assemblage of men involved in an uprising. So our First Amendment, and it's so funny. It's so funny, James, when you watch the news today, how ridiculous it seems that the First Amendment can be used for doing anything, right? I think I saw something on the news last night that some school has no more dress code because it violates the First Amendment. I mean, it's right, but really, the first part of the First Amendment stems from we sent representatives to Philadelphia to meet in the Continental Congress, and the king didn't like it and outlawed that. So when I say a circular letter from the king, it's not just William Franklin in New Jersey that gets it, but every single governor in the 13 colonies gets the same letter. Let me backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
John DeHart, one of our representatives, sat on the New Jersey Supreme Court. Kinsey would become, after the war, Chief Justice of New Jersey Supreme Court. William Livingston would replace William Franklin as the governor of New Jersey. But the king decided he's gonna outlaw gunpowder because these guys met in public. And it's interesting now that if we want to consider what our Bill of Rights looks like now. The people have a right to freely assemble together to consult for the common good and make known their opinions to their representatives and petition for redress of grievances. That is really the trigger on the circular letter for the powder. So it's not just New Jersey that gets it. Massachusetts, General Gage gets it, and Dartmouth is either Dunmore or Dartmouth or the governor in Virginia. One of those two guys gets. I'll figure it out in a second here. So 164 days after Dartmouth's letter to Franklin, Franklin responds with a letter of his own. And this is what it reads. Upon receiving your lordship circular dispatch of the 19th of October, I immediately gave notice to the officers of the customs and others of His Majesty's order in council relative to the importation of arms and ammunition, and directed the seizing of all such as should be imported into this province without a license from His Majesty or the Privy Council for the purpose. His Majesty may rely that nothing shall be wanting on my part towards a punctual execution of his intentions in this respect within his government. So when I start off by telling you that I was involved in a project in Scotts Plains, New Jersey, with a colonel in the militia that was burying cannonballs in his basement. Why did he bury cannonballs in his basement? Well, after the circular letter from the king outlawing arms and ammunition, the governors began to raid suspected powder houses, suspected armories of the militia. And obviously they weren't going, at this particular time, they're not going house to house, but they're going after the big stuff. So when we're in fourth grade and we talk about Lexington and Concord, General Gage didn't decide, I'm going to march on Lexington and Concord. General Gage got a letter from the king and said, I don't want these guys who went down into Philadelphia and are talking about overthrowing my government to have guns. So Gage goes to Lexington and Concord. Our colonel in New Jersey realizes that he buries his cannonballs. But the weird thing is that William Franklin always knew the militia was able to obtain arms and drill for defense. There's a letter from Lord Hillsborough to William Franklin in 1771. And all these letters that I'm reading are in the New Jersey archives. So it's not like nobody knows that these exist. Everybody knows these exist. Just nobody cares anymore. But this is the letter from Lord Hillsborough to Franklin. His Majesty has no doubt of your attention. So, let me back up a second. 1771. This is pre-Revolutionary War, towards the end of the French and Indian War. His Majesty has no doubt of your attention to the security of the colony under your government and the disposition of his faithful subjects in New Jersey, to concur with you in every measure that would have been necessary for putting into a state of defense in case the issue of the dispute with Spain had been to the contrary to His Majesty's expectation. So these guys were constantly arming themselves, supplying themselves with powder, supplying themselves with muskets, and even supplying themselves with cannon, because they were always concerned that we were going to be invaded. And whether it was the French and Indians or what started to happen in that time was Spain started to go up the Delaware River and make raids. So these guys started to defend themselves. One of the things that happened in the Delaware River when the Spanish were coming up and raiding in Pennsylvania was Ben Franklin, William's dad, started to organize the militia in Pennsylvania, which was very difficult to do because they were all Quakers in Pennsylvania and nobody wanted to fight, so nobody was allowed really to do anything because of the way that the government was set up. It wasn't that anyone was not allowed to do anything, it was that the government didn't organize anything. But Ben Franklin put together a bunch of letters to the Quaker leadership in Pennsylvania and said, listen, we need some cannon. And if you guys don't want to do it, I'm going to do it, and I'll raise the money, and we'll buy the cannon from Massachusetts and have it shipped down here, and we'll stick the cannon up, in select places along the river. And when the Spanish come up the river, we'll start shooting our cannon at them, and that'll stop the raids in the port cities. And that's exactly what Franklin did. They didn't say he couldn't do it. They just said they weren't going to pay for it. So he raised his own money, went out and bought cannon from Massachusetts, came down, and him and his guys set it up along the river. And when the Spanish came back down the river, they started shooting their cannon at the Spanish, and they didn't come back anymore. Anyway.
That's actually really impressive, because that's an example of basically a private army where, the army wasn't funded through taxes. It was raised privately, and businesses that were at risk were the ones willing to pay for the cannons. So
exactly, and that's the point, right? So think about this. You don't really have to go by cannon unless somebody's coming down the river and trying to plunder you. But once they start, you're a businessman. You're trying to make money. That's no good to have the Spanish bringing their ships up and start plundering the city because they're robbing you. So then you go out and buy cannon, and it's a small insurance policy, and that's the way it was always set up. It wasn't we're going to give 38% of our 38% of our paycheck to the government so the government can spend ridiculous amounts of money, money we don't even know where it's going, and say we need it for the common defense. That's exactly why the militia was set up the way it was. Anyway, this is from 1771, okay? So we're going back in time a little bit. This is 16 days before the last one I read you, the State of Defense letter. This is William Franklin. Quote, during the prospect of the late war, the defenseless state of this province must no doubt have occurred to you and to the people in general. His Majesty's uniform wishes to preserve the public tranquility may not always be successful. A time of peace, however, is certainly the best time to prepare for war, and there is no knowing how soon an event may happen. So think about that. This is the governor of New Jersey in 1771, 5 years before the Revolution. So in Heller, we talk about all the time at the time of the founding, how the founders viewed the Second Amendment. So there's the governor of New Jersey, and he's saying the government can't always protect you. And we don't know when these things are going to happen. So the time of peace is certainly the best time to prepare for war. And that's a very, very common theme, 1771, 1776 founding fathers. But think about the Sicardy Rule for a minute, right? we don't qualify for a 2C58-4 permit unless we can estimate in advance when we're going to be attacked. I think in Drake, that's how it actually reads, that we have to know in advance when we're going to be attacked. And if we don't know that, then we're not allowed. We don't qualify for the carry permit. Now, that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But at the time of the founding, which is super, super important in Heller, was the way that the founding generation viewed the Second Amendment, you prepared for war during times of peace. So I'm not being attacked today, but I might be at some future time. So today I go apply for my 2C58-4 permit. That's the way it's supposed to be. You don't wait until after you've been attacked to apply. You apply before you've been attacked. Okay. So we're talking about the founding generation, and the common thought is prepare for war in time of peace. Okay? So this is probably the first time anybody's have ever heard this. In 1793, George Washington appoints William Patterson to the Supreme Court. William Patterson actually signed New Jersey's Constitution in 1776, which is 2 days before the Declaration of Independence. So it's July 2nd, 1776. Patterson's one of the signers of that. Patterson went to Princeton with James Madison. Patterson is the Attorney General for William Livingston that codified the laws in New Jersey just after the Revolution. So I don't know if we talked about this last time. Patterson left out the Statute of Northampton, and because Patterson left out the Statute of Northampton, the way the courts read Patterson's laws is that the Statute of Northampton is no longer applicable in the state of New Jersey. Anyway, Patterson writes what I would consider to be a Federalist paper. Okay, so it's not Hamilton and it's not John Jay, but he writes. It's called the necessity of a well-regulated militia. I think that's what it's called. I think it's the Constitutional Current, which is a paper out in Trenton. Anyway, it's very long, and one day we should do an hour on it because it's 2 pages long and there's so much stuff in there that no one's ever read. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's not the Constitutional Current. It's the Brunswick Guardian. He writes under the surname of Aurelius, but it's Patterson. And the funny thing is, this is a month before he's appointed by Washington to the Supreme Court. And if you read his decisions as Supreme Court justice, there are so many times that he steals paragraphs from it's called an essay on a well-regulated militia. There's so many times as Supreme Court justice that he steals paragraphs from his essay on a well-regulated militia. Anyway, this is what Patterson writes. A well-regulated militia is considered as essential to the preservation of civil liberty. What indeed is a militia but the people themselves prepared to act as soldiers for the purpose of resisting oppression and securing their rights? To be prepared for war is the way to prevent it. To be ready in arms to meet and resist tyranny never fails to deter its approach. So, 1793, 22 years after William Franklin, Patterson's using the prepare for war in time of peace. Jonathan Dayton uses it. Jonathan Dayton's our representative in the Constitutional Convention. When they're talking about the militia, Jonathan Dayton uses it, saying, and they're talking about how they're going to divide the country up between the Article 1, Section 8 Army and the Article 1, Section 8 militia. And Dayton says preparations for war are generally made in peace. Washington uses it. Washington uses it all the time. There's a Latin proverb. It's called si vis pacem parabellum. Si vis pacem parabellum just means if you desire peace, prepare for war. But all the founders knew it. That's why you look on the side of your Beretta 9mm and it says 9mm Parabellum. Parabellum just means for war. But William Franklin, his speech continues, okay? He's got another paragraph in his speech. Quote, "This is therefore a matter worthy of your particular attention. For my part, I know nothing we have to rely on under God for our protection against the sudden attempts of an enemy, but the regiment of regulars which His Majesty has been so kind to afford us, and the militia." So, just like today's Article 1, Section 8, the Royal Governor of New Jersey in 1771 said, we don't just rely on government regulars, we rely on government regulators and the militia at the same time. You know, what the government tries to tell us today is that we don't need a 2C58-4 permit. We don't need 17-round handgun mags and 30-round AR mags because the government will protect us. What they don't tell you is that in tort reform, if they don't protect you, you can't sue them. Right?
Yep.
Like, so one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence was that Great Britain had, quote, affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. You know, General Gage in Boston, Lord Dunmore did the same thing in Virginia. Lord Dunmore, after the King's circular letter, gets nervous because Patrick Henry goes to the, I think it's the 2nd Virginia Assembly. They get together in a bar in Virginia, in a church in Virginia. This is when Patrick Henry gives his give me liberty or give me death speech. Lord Dunmore, who's the royal governor of Virginia, is upset now that these guys went. Now, these are just Virginia men, but they meet again to discuss what they're going to do about the king. And he sends a bunch of Royal Marines to the powder house and steals, I think it's 160 kegs of powder out of the powder house. This is a big problem because, according to Patrick Henry, that doesn't belong to the king or the governor. It belongs to the people, that the people have been paying taxes, and we wouldn't consider them the same as taxes that we pay. Basically, it was more of a contribution. If you wanted to do business and the local militia officers, and I think the easiest way to explain it, this is very similar to what we would call today like a volunteer fire company. So imagine the captain and the lieutenants of the militia say, look, we need a 3% tax on everything you buy because we got to start buying powder and cannonball and muskets because we have to be ready for an attack. You didn't actually have to pay. If you didn't pay, those guys were very influential, and they just told everybody else, don't do business with that guy because he's not paying to contribute to the powder. That's the way it worked. That's the way it worked not only with Patrick Henry's the Hanover Independent Militia, but George Washington and George Mason are the Fairfax Militia. And George Mason and George Washington also put a tax on in Fairfax. And if you didn't, it wasn't really a tax. Again, it's a contribution. If you didn't pay the contribution, they just told everybody don't do business with you. And George Mason and George Washington were super influential. And they told you don't do business with, Mr. Smith, because Mr. Smith didn't contribute. You didn't do business with Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith went out of business pretty fast. So everybody paid. But again, what these guys are trying to do now is they're trying to say that we're going to take the powder away from the militia and render the military independent. They're trying to say we only need the king's forces, and it's the same argument. It's the same argument they're using today, right? This is the same argument we get with the 2C58-4. You don't need to carry a gun because the cops will protect you. It's ridiculous, right? Yeah. This has been going on since 1775. Anyway, our forefathers never forgot this. And you also have to remember that the Second Amendment is not a novel principle during the Bill of Rights. It's not even a novel principle when they're drafting the Constitution. I have stuff going back to ancient Greek with the translation is almost the exact same as the Second Amendment. Anyway, let's just go back to why it's so bizarre that William Franklin, as the governor of New Jersey, is doing the same thing as Lord Dunmore in Virginia and the military governor Gage in Boston. Because one time William Franklin knew exactly what the Second Amendment meant, and it existed in New Jersey well before the Constitution. So I'm going back to William Franklin speaking to the council and the assembly in Burlington on May 22nd, 1765. You probably never heard this either. This is what Franklin tells the assembly. Quote, "A well-regulated militia is the utmost importance to the security of the inhabitants from foreign invasions and internal commotions." Right? So this is 11 years before the Declaration of Independence, 25 years before the Bill of Rights. So everybody talks about, the anti-gunners talk about the free state in the Second Amendment means New Jersey, Virginia, Connecticut, right?
Yep.
We've heard that for years.
Right. National Guard. Yeah. Yep.
Right. And that well-regulated means that they can put regulations on it, like 2C58-4 and 2C58-3 in the magazine ban. If you talk to David Rosenthal, who I would say is probably the authority in militia equipment.
Really?
You have a conversation with that guy. He knows everything there is to know. Well regulated meant you had the proper number of cartridges. You carried the proper supply of powder. You carried the proper supply of lead. You carried your jig that you could melt your jig in your pot, that you could melt your lead and make new ball as you needed it. You carried a camp kettle, and you carried a tent, and you carried blankets. Because one of the problems we had in the Revolution was that guys were showing up. Guys didn't have powder. Guys didn't have ball. Guys didn't have muskets. But one of the things Washington complained about most was guys would show up to camp without tents, without sleeping bags, and without kettles, and they couldn't feed them, and they had guys were sleeping outside in, late November, New Jersey, and they didn't have tents and blankets. Well-regulated means you bring all the stuff that you need to survive while you're here, and you bring all the stuff you need to fight. Well-regulated didn't mean the government was allowed to 2C58-4 Sicardi rule us and say, you don't need a carry permit because you haven't been attacked. Oh, by the way, there was a shooting in Parkland, Florida, and now you don't need anything more than 10-round magazines. It's ridiculous. That's an absurd reading of the Second Amendment. Anyway, Franklin doesn't say for the security of a free state. We could spend another hour on what a free state means because it doesn't mean it has nothing to do with a state. It's a type of government. Anyway, let's not get into that because that'll take too long. But William Franklin, the governor of New Jersey, says the well-regulated militia is the utmost importance for the security of the inhabitants. That's for our security. That's for you and me. The militia is for you and me, not the state, not the collective. It's clearly individual. And it's not just against foreign invasion. It's not just against the French and Indian War. It's not just against the Spanish. It's not just against the British. The internal commotions is, your day-to-day crime. So that's really what it meant at the time of the founding. Let's move forward a little bit, okay? So now we're into the war, the Revolutionary War. I'm going to bring up. I can't do this with Jersey guys, but I think some of these guys are going to be better for us to understand what goes on. Okay, so remember the King's circular letter. His words were seizing arms and ammunition imported to this province without a license from His Majesty. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to talk about Alexander. I'm going to start with Alexander Hamilton. We know Alexander Hamilton as a writer of the Federalist Papers, right? We know Alexander Hamilton as one of Washington's best and most trusted artillery officers. Richard Brookhiser does a biography on him. And in the biography, he tells us that Hamilton was a member of the Corsicans. And the Corsicans very similar to the Liberty Boys or the Sons of Liberty. The Corsicans wore leather skull caps that had the inscription "Liberty or Death" on them. So these are young guys. These are guys 20 to 25 years old. And they're an independent unit of, and for lack of a better explanation of the Corsicans, they're the Sons of Liberty as we know it from all this history that we took. Brookhiser's biography tells us that at the end of August in 1775, now I'm in New York now, the Corsicans went into the battery to steal the cannon. So the cannon that they went to steal, when we talk about the battery is, they still talk about the battery. Getting a taxi in New York and say, "Take me to the battery." They know where you're going. That's where the king's troops kept all their weapons. So Alexander Hamilton break into the king's armory and steal the king's cannon. In March of 1776, the state government of New York commissions Alexander Hamilton as a captain with instructions to raise a provincial company of artillery to protect Manhattan. So Congress and George Washington has assembled Continentals, militia, and state units, and these independent groups like Hamilton's provincial company to defend New York. Hamilton reports to Washington's chief of artillery, who's Henry Knox, and serves alongside Knox's gunners throughout that fall campaign in 1776. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Knox, but Knox too stole his cannon. He didn't have cannon. Knox learned how to shoot cannon. He was a Boston bookseller, read books on cannon, formed a cannon club in Boston. And these guys used to just go out and shoot cannon for fun. That was like their hobby. That's what they did. Like for you and me, it's like going to gun for hire and shooting a Glock. But these guys went out and shot cannon. And that's why it's so funny. Like before, we were talking about what does the Second Amendment give you the right to have a bazooka? Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently, according to Hamilton and Knox, it does. So Knox, the Massachusetts government seizes all his cannon, but he comes up with a plan to go out. There's a fort in Saratoga that's lightly defended by the king's troops. He comes up with a plan to steal it. Nobody knows how to go get it. They take the Green Mountain Boys out of Vermont, so it's like Ethan Allen, Seth Warner, those guys. And they also send Benedict Arnold, who's actually a badass back in the day before he switched sides. Benedict Arnold goes out just to make it a legitimate military exercise, but he has no troops. He's kind of in command of the Green Mountain Boys, but they don't respect him at all, so they're doing what they're doing just because they don't like the British. Knox is trying to put this whole thing together. He goes out, they steal 13 cannon from Saratoga. Thank God it snows. Knox builds sleds, and they drag these things back on sleds to Boston. Washington's hiding out on a hill, and Boston has 0 cannon. The entire British fleet is in Boston Harbor ready to pounce on them. These guys drag these cannon up to the top of the hill, build them into the bulwarks overnight, and when the British wake up in the morning, there's 13 cannon from Saratoga pointed down on them, and that was the day that the British decided to leave Boston and go to New York. So Henry Knox and the Green Mountain Boys stealing. Now, look, Henry Knox at the time is just a Boston bookseller. He doesn't become Washington's head of the artillery and then Secretary of Defense until after this happens. The Green Mountain Boys these are just a bunch of tough guys that want to go fight, and they go wherever they want to go. Nobody actually tells these guys where to go, but Knox talked them into going and stealing the cannon. That pretty much saves Washington from losing the war right there. So on January 11, 2007, the United States House of Representatives honors Alexander Hamilton. And this is what the House of Representatives writes in 2007. Quote, whereas Hamilton achieved the rank of lieutenant, studied military history and tactics on his own, and led a successful raid for British cannon in the battery, the capture of which resulted in the Hearts of Oak becoming an artillery company thereafter. Whereas through his connections with influential New York patriots like Alexander McDougall and John Jay, he raised his own artillery company of 60 men in 1776 drilling them, selecting and purchasing their uniforms with donated funds, and the company in turn chose the young man as their captain who caught the eye of George Washington. So the royal authority, the king and the governor of New York at the time, they don't recognize Alexander Hamilton. They don't recognize Hamilton's artillery company. Hamilton stole the cannon from the legal authority. So for us today in 2018, these guys love this reasonable regulations, right? For us to assume in 2018 that urgent necessity and the Sicardy rule, New Jersey Administrative Code 1354-2.4D, is a reasonable regulation that the founders at the time of the founding would adhere to is absurd. Quite frankly, I've always thought, in the true words of the Second Amendment, that 2C58-4 is illegal. But I think because I read so many law cases, it would just be impossible to argue that. I don't think there's enough paper or money to do it. So let's just say for the sake of argument, even though you and you agree that you think 2C58-3 in the true spirit of the Second Amendment is illegal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you think that, then 2C58-4, the urgent necessity, is clearly out of bounds, right?
Right.
But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that 2C58-3 is legal, okay? And I personally, knowing some of the crazy people that I know, don't have a problem with the background check. As long as you go down and you get your fingerprints, right, and you get your permits in a timely fashion, that really doesn't bother me. It's not, especially now. With I don't know how many handguns you have, but my safe is full.
Yeah.
I'm not a woman who was just attacked and raped 3 days ago. I don't have an emergency to get another handgun. My guys in the town that I live in, if I go fill out another handgun carry permit application, I'm getting them back in 4 days. So, to me, there is no Second Amendment violation. These guys, as long as now, what I'll tell you is a Second Amendment violation is this electronic SBI 212A form you have to fill out now. So you're old enough to remember when we had to fill out the yellow sheet SBI 212A form. Do you remember the yellow sheet? Which was the non-criminal history background check, or the criminal history background check they ran on you when you went back to get, like, let's say your second and third handgun or your fifth and sixth handgun, and they would make you fill out the yellow sheet. You had to sign it in front of him and pay $18 for that. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that one.
Okay. So this is what they were doing. You go down and get your firearms ID card, and when you got your firearms ID card, did you get handgun permits the same day?
Same day. Did I? I don't think I did. I think that was one of those things. So you
went down to get your FID card, and then you got into shooting, right? You started with a shotgun, maybe you had a rifle, maybe you got into an AR, and then you decided you can't walk by that case, right? Look at all that good stuff in there and not want a handgun, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so let's say 9 months later, you go back to get your first. How many permits did you get the first time you went to get a handgun?
6.
One, or did you get all 4? You got 2. Okay, so you had to pay $2 for each one, right? You had to pay those guys $4 for the 2 permits. They should have made you pay another $18 for the SBI 212A form. And what that is a criminal history background check. It's the way it's explained to me is, and this isn't in writing, so this is just the way it was explained to me. The state police told my firearms investigator that if you hadn't had your background check in the last 6 months, you have to fill out this form, because if you committed a crime or robbed a bank in the last 6 months, they need to know it before they issue you another handgun permit. That's what I was told.
Yep.
It's ridiculous, because it's the exact same background check as the NICS background check. So when you go to buy the gun at point of purchase, they run that NICS check on you for $15. The NICS check is the FBI database. It's also the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation database, which is what the SBI 212A form is the state police database. What they don't tell you about the $20 charge is it goes into a fund. This is actually in written in the New Jersey statutes. It goes into a fund, and the state police use it to buy new police cars. That's what. Yeah. So a guy like me who, and my wife's standing in the other room, so I have to be careful when I say this. A guy like me who, from 2006 to 2009, was really into shooting, and I'm talking about 500 rounds twice a week. And I would go down, monthly and get a new handgun. I'm paying $18 a month for this stupid SBI 212A form. That, to me, is a complete infringement of the Second Amendment. Charging me $20, it's a tax. Every time I buy a handgun, I have to pay an extra $20 for this background check. And it's a double tax, too, because I also turn around paying the $15 on the back end to point of purchase for NICS, which is the exact same background check. Yep. They don't need this. They don't need this SBI. So today, you know what it is today, right? Today, if you go down to get a handgun permit, either before you do it, and to do it, you have to know your police department's 3-digit code. But you get onto the state police website, and now they do it electronically, and you type in your name and address and your social security number, and I think you have to type in your FID card number, and then they run the SBI 212A form. Quite frankly, I don't think they do anything except take your $20, to be honest with you. But whatever. Yeah. It's just a way for these guys to keep banging us for more taxes every time we buy a gun. Right. It's ridiculous. It's not actually allowable under the statute. They're actually not allowed to have any more conditions than what is written in the statute, which are your fingerprints, your mental health consent form. You know the list. They're not actually allowed to charge you any more money or ask for other stuff. Some of these police departments. Navin's got a couple cases where some of these police departments get crazy and they want like 10 certified references instead of the 2, and they're not allowed to do stuff like that. So, I think one of the other things, getting back to Hamilton, that we need to understand is that Hamilton wasn't a member of the National Guard. He wasn't a member of the state police troops. Hamilton, according to the House of Representatives, studied military history and tactics on his own. So any of these guys, any of these liberal arguments that you're a citizen and you can't defend yourself against the government, that's absolutely ridiculous. England was the top military in the world at the time, and they got their asses kicked by a bunch of ragtag farmers that really didn't have a whole bunch of money to get into this war. There's a court case that I think is going to be the court case that ends up deciding whether the Sicardi rule 2C58-4's justifiable need is compliant with Heller or not, called Schubert v. DeBard. It's an Indiana case. I think I brought it up before. Anyway, in Schubert, they have the exact same 2C58-4 need requirement that we do. Schubert applies. He says he needs his handgun carry permit for self-defense. DeBard, the police chief, shoots him down and says it's not a valid reason. The court says, now Indiana has a Second Amendment analog in their state constitution. The court says, you're wrong. Self-defense is a lawful purpose. As long as he writes down self-defense and it's a lawful purpose, the police chief has to issue the permit. And they talk about the police chief, and this is what the court says about his approach in denying the permit. Such an approach contravenes the essential nature of the constitutional guarantee. It would supplant the right with a mere administrative privilege which might be withheld simply on the basis that such matters as the use of firearms are better left to the organized military and police forces, even where the defense of the individual citizen is involved. And that's really what we get in New Jersey from the police chiefs. And most of them will tell you when they deny you for your 2C58-4 permit that, I would love to give it to you, but I'm not allowed to. But I don't know. I don't know about that. I think a lot of police chiefs don't want to give it to you because they do. They think they're the guys that should be carrying guns. And remember, they're a union. Right. the more problems that there are, the more guys that they can hire, the more money changes hands their way. So why would they want a bunch of us carrying guns and crime to drop? Because then all of a sudden you don't need so many guys, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of retirement packages, and a lot of payroll involved there. You got to keep that thing going. I think the reason I bring up Schubert, it's a little off topic for us, but Heller spends a couple pages on the state Second Amendment analogs at the time of the founding, or just after the founding, or just before. And Indiana's is one of them. I think they're like 1789. But Heller formulated its decision by using those state Second Amendment analogs as evidence on what the federal Second Amendment actually meant. So they used Indiana to formulate that the Second Amendment is not a state's right, that it's an individual right. So the reason I think Schubert is good for us is because Heller specifically mentions Indiana, that they used Indiana to formulate their opinion of the Second Amendment. If Indiana has this, it's almost the exact same verbiage in the Indiana code to get a permit to carry a handgun as it is in New Jersey, justifiable need standard. And I don't think they even use justifiable. I think they just use need. That if you can demonstrate that one of the states that Heller used to formulate its opinion on the Second Amendment says you can't hold permits as an administrative privilege, then it's very easy for the court to see what New Jersey's doing is flat out crazy. And there's 15 or 16 different other ways to sell it. This just gives them some stuff to cite. Anyway, let's get back on target with the founding fathers not adhering to the gun law, the 2C58-3 and the 2C58-4 of the day. According to the Central Intelligence Agency, the founding fathers covertly set up a trading company that would supply arms and ammunition to the cause of independence. And ironically, it's Governor Franklin's father, Ben Franklin, among others, who would be involved with Sam Adams, Arthur Lee, and Silas Deane in courting the aid of France. And so through a French agent, Franklin and Silas Deane, it's a big name here. We sent Silas Deane over to France. He did a lot of the really covert undercover work at the time. They established this secret trading firm called Rodrigo Hurtalis and C. France ends up giving Hurtalis and C $1 million livres for its operation. Spain also matches France's $1 million livres. So what's happening is England is the top military, top navy of the day. If they want to lock off trading ports from France and England, Portugal, they can do it. They want to lock the French and the Spanish out of the Caribbean, they can do it. France knows it can't fight England toe-to-toe. Spain knows it can't fight England toe-to-toe. So they see that the Americans are having a war, and it's for them. I mean, it might as well be called a proxy war. They're throwing in money to the United States, kind of like Charlie Wilson got the government to do when the Russians are fighting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 90s, that they're secretly funneling money to not the Americans, but this trading company, Hurtalis and C. Spain directly delivers 10,000 pounds of gunpowder through Hurtalis and C to the Virginia Council of Defense. So I don't know if you've read Richard Ketchum's book, The Winter Soldiers, but Richard Ketchum says Hurtalis and C is responsible for 80% of the powder used by the rebel troops. So this is all, I mean, the easiest way to compare it in today's terms would be drug smuggling.
Right.
These are Americans who are making deals with the Spanish and the French to buy powder, lead, and muskets illegally and bring them through the black market into the United States. Now these guys are gonna be hung for this if they're caught. Not even given a trial. They're gonna be hung right on the British ship. So the guy, Ben Franklin is now an illegal gun smuggler. You know, they didn't teach us that in fourth grade, right? They taught us that he flew a kite, a lightning storm, and there was a key up. He invented electricity, but this guy's an illegal gun smuggler, which is hilarious because his son is the royal governor of New Jersey trying to take away the guns. So there's an island called St. Eustatia in the West Indies. It's a Dutch free port. It's really British intelligence calls it the rendezvous of everything and everybody meant to be clandestinely conveyed to America. So it's a major source of gunpowder. If you're a Spanish flag ship, you can't go to the United States and drop off your powder. They're going to confiscate your ship and your crew. If you're a French ship, you can't go to the United States and drop off your powder. You're going to get confiscated. So what they would do is they would sail to Eustatia, unload, get paid, and then they would put it on privateer ships, guys who are good at running the barricade, and they would bring it back into the United States.
Huh.
So David McCullough is the biographer of John Adams, and when he writes about St. Eustatia, he purports that one vessel docked in Philadelphia from St. Eustatia with 49,000 pounds of gunpowder. If you track down the timeline from David McCullough's book, that 49,000 pounds of gunpowder is actually the gunpowder that Washington ends up using when he crosses the Delaware Christmas Eve. And up until that ship came into Philadelphia, Washington was virtually out of powder, had almost nothing. So, our founding fathers, and when I say that, I don't even mean George Washington and Patrick Henry and George Mason and James Madison. I mean your great-grandfather to the ninth power, right? My great-grandfather to the ninth power. The regular people were out smuggling guns. They were out smuggling powder because you're not going to beat the biggest army in America if you don't have any powder.
Right.
And the circular letter just said you can't import it anymore. But what the governors took it to mean was we can go steal it from anybody we want. If we don't think that they're Tories, if we think they're patriots, we're just going to go take their stuff. And that's what Gage was doing in Boston. If you wanted, when Gage locked down Boston, you had to get a pass or a license from General Gage to leave Boston. Why would you have to leave Boston? Well, it was winter. It was cold. You had to go get firewood. If you couldn't leave Boston, there's no more firewood left in Boston. There's 5,000 people live there. Yep. You had to go out in the woods and pick up your firewood, take your horse and your cart, and go load up for the week. Gage doesn't let you do that unless you deposit your guns at the Sentry Station on the way out. So he's got all the bridges locked up. He's got there's one land exit, right? He's got the one land exit locked up. And if you want to leave and go get firewood, if you want to leave and go get food, you got to give your guns to the British. And they gave you a little coupon, and you were supposed to be able to get your guns back. He never gave them back. I think he took 1,750 guns. I don't think he gave one back.
Wow.
So
like the pre-Revolutionary War equivalent of a gun buyback.
Yeah, right. Except you're starving, right? You're
Yeah.
starving and you have to do it. All right, so listen. This is where it gets good. And I know that you have time constraints and you're going to cut. If you have to cut from the first sentence I started on, everything I just told you out, and start here, this is where you want to start.
Okay.
Remember I said before you listen to the podcast, the listener should go on Google Scholar, type in District of Columbia v. Heller and pull it up. Go into the find bar and search St. George Tucker. Tucker is cited 16 times in Heller. St. George Tucker's edition of Blackstone Commentaries would become known as America's Blackstone. And the difference between Tucker's Blackstone and Blackstone is that Tucker throws out all the English law that's not applicable in New Jersey after the Constitution, usually in footnotes. But Tucker's Blackstone is one of the legal texts most frequently cited by the United States Supreme Court and relied on by lawyers appearing before the court for the first few decades in the 19th century. And that's not me saying that. That's coming out that sentence I just gave you comes out of a law review. I mean, that's not just my opinion. That's everyone's opinion. So Tucker is a law student, I think at William and Mary. And as the revolution starts to take off, everything shuts down. Remember, there's a tax on paper, so when they shut down the stamp collectors, there are no more documents for the court. The court shut down, the law school shut down. So Tucker leaves and goes back to now. St. George Tucker's from Bermuda. He's not an American. His father is Henry Tucker, is the royal governor of Bermuda. He goes back to Bermuda in June of 1775, 4 months after William Franklin advances the king's ban on arms and ammunition. Before Tucker departs, he tells Peyton Randolph and Thomas Jefferson of a powder magazine in Bermuda that's exactly the same as the powder magazine in Virginia that we just talked about, that Dunmore raided. And it might be a target for rebel retaliation. So there's a revolutionary author. Her name is Helena Gore. She's a book. I'll tell you what, it's a strange book. It's probably not the easiest title to find. You probably can't find it new. You probably got to buy it used, but it's from 1955. But you can still get it. It's called The Secret War of Independence. So Gore writes that in July of 1775, Colonel Tucker, now this is St. George Tucker's father, Henry, arrived in Philadelphia to persuade Congress to rescind its resolutions to stop sending foodstuffs to the West Indies. Dr. Franklin, who's Ben, was extremely glad to meet the friendly Bermudian and to hear certain news he confided. In the Royal Arsenal at St. George's, the colonel said, there was a respectable supply of gunpowder, but no guard. So, you remember from school the non-importation agreements, right? So we said to the British, hey, if you guys are going to continue to tax us on tea, and you're going to continue to tax us on stamps, you're going to start quartering soldiers in our houses and all the other things that was going on. We're no longer allowing American farmers to send food to England. And not only to England, but to all your colonies in the Caribbean and anywhere else, India, but wherever else you have a colony. We're just not sending it. We're not sending tobacco, and we're not sending food. Ben Franklin and Robert Morris. Now, Robert Morris, a big player. Robert Morris, we don't hear a whole bunch about Robert Morris in the Revolution, but Robert Morris is the, for lack of a better word, Donald Trump of the day. He's super wealthy. He also is in shipping. So Robert Morris and Ben Franklin work out Henry Tucker's food problem. Now, because you know what they grow in Bermuda, right? They grow onions. They don't have any food over there. So all the food they get has to come from the United States. So Morris and Franklin work out Henry Tucker's food problem by exchanging food for guns in any vessel arriving in Bermuda. So what happens is this. Now this is the royal governor of Bermuda. His people are starving. His whole livelihood depends on being a governor for England. But now his people are starving. What's he going to do? Any ship that came in from Bermuda loaded with gunpowder and guns, the Americans would fill back up with food and send it back to Bermuda. So now Bermuda, it's only 900 miles away, becomes the second St. Eustatia and starts smuggling guns. So if you're off the coast of the United States, your ship doesn't want to come to the United States because you're worried that's going to get caught by the British. You go to Bermuda and you unload your stuff, and then the Bermudan people put it back on a Bermuda ship or a privateer and send it over to the United States, knowing that if they send the powder and the guns to the United States, they're going to get food back. It was a pretty good deal for us. Very good deal for Bermuda, probably a better deal for us. Anyway, St. George Tucker leaves Bermuda, comes back to the United States. The Americans put together a raid. Now, this is Ben Franklin and Robert Morris set this thing up with the Virginia guys and St. George Tucker. They raid the estate of Governor Brewer, who's he's not Henry Tucker. He's a different guy. But the raiders the raiders are, and I quote, and I'm quoting from Helena Gore, the raiders were Bermudians from the west and east ends, the ship's crew, and young St. George Tucker. So what happens is the British ship that goes to steal the powder out of the Bermuda powder house can't navigate the shoals in Bermuda, all the coral reefs. You ever been to Bermuda?
No, I haven't. Nope.
All right, when you go to Bermuda, all the way around the island, it's like 4 feet deep, and you could walk way out in the water, and there's coral everywhere. And so if you're a ship coming in, especially a sailing vessel, if you don't have a local with you, you don't make it into the island because you don't know where the channels are, and you're going to run aground.
Yeah.
So they take St. George Tucker with them. Now, he's just a young kid. He's in his 20s. They take St. George Tucker with him. He tells them where to throw the anchor down, and they row their boats. Tucker holds a party that night. And so while everyone's at the party and all the guards are up guarding the party, they sneak into the powder house. They lower St. George Tucker down through a window in the roof, and he unlocks it. They unload all the powder back onto the rowboats, take it out to the ship, and bring it back to the United States. So certainly any law student who's read Tucker's Blackstone is going to do a double take that a professor of law at the University of William and Mary and one of the judges on the General Court in Virginia rolled a few barrels of illegal powder. This is true. So when the dissent in Heller tries to cite St. George Tucker as an authority why the majority opinion in Heller is wrong, they have no idea what they're talking about. St. George Tucker himself was an illegal gun smuggler. He would not adhere to 2C58-3. He clearly violated it. He would not adhere to 2C58-4. He clearly violates it. He doesn't think you need a license from the king to do any of this stuff. He just goes and steals it. Why? Because his dad needs food for his people. That's the only reason. So anybody who thinks they know what the Second Amendment means doesn't really know what it means until you understand that the founders themselves, St. George Tucker, one of the most cited jurists by the Supreme Court of the United States, was an illegal gun smuggler. So aside from actually participating in the theft of the powder, Tucker's father writes a letter back to Ben Franklin. And Tucker's father credits St. George Tucker with the plan to smuggle the powder out of the powder house and back to the United States. So this is August 12th, 1775, Henry Tucker to Benjamin Franklin. And I'm just gonna read this to you. It's a little bit long for us, but it's totally worth hearing. Quote, "My son St. George Tucker, in parentheses, a youth lately called to the bar at Williamsburg, but on account of the courts being stopped is now here till times alter. End parentheses, informs me of a letter he wrote to Mr. Randolph, late President of Congress, and Mr. Jefferson, one of the delegates for Virginia, representing the state of this island and proposing to them whether a plan may not be concerted to the advantage of America by making this island a medium for trade of non-enumerated goods between the American colonies and foreign ports, as we are under no restriction in reshipping such goods to any parts. This would not only be a means of disposing large quantities of your produce, but would also open a door for obtaining powder, etc. For no doubt, so soon as the French and Dutch feels the want of provisions, they will suffer powder to be exchanged for them. But should this plan be adopted by Congress, it should be conducted with great prudence and secrecy and committed to the transaction of a very few. I have wrote pretty full upon the subject to Mr. Robert Morris, Chairman of the Committee of Safety, and have desired him to consult with you, which I dare say he will do. My son also wrote to Mr. Jefferson, and I flatter myself, if it is thought practicable, it will always be readily adopted, and it will give me great pleasure in being anyways instrumental in assisting the general cause of America." So there's a lot in there, but it explains everything I just said, really. But Henry Tucker gives credit for the entire plan of sending a ship from America to Bermuda to steal the powder. He gives credit to St. George Tucker. So again, let's go back to Heller. Let's go back to Heller citing Tucker 16 times. Let's just say the majority cites him 8 times. the descent sites many times. The fact that the guy who basically wrote America's Blackstone was an illegal gun smuggler tells you exactly what you need to know. If we don't say anything else about the founding history, the guy who wrote Tucker's Blackstone was an illegal gun smuggler, which means St. George Tucker's not putting up with the 10-round magazine ban. This proposed no pistol grip, where they're going to try to outlaw ARs and AKs in New Jersey. Tucker's not adhering to that. No way. To Tucker, that's just a brown vest. His job is to go get muskets. His job, if he could get Kentucky long rifles, he would have taken them too. If he could get cannon, he would take cannon too. We know the founders were stealing cannon. They're not adhering to any of this nonsense. So this whole reasonable regulation thing is ridiculous. And look, I'm just telling you, we can do another hour on reasonable regulation. Reasonable regulation is probably one of the biggest scams of the Second Amendment. It comes out of the police power, and it's just a joke. And quite frankly, the whole concealed carry police power reasonable regulation thing is another scam that we kind of fell for in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And our Second Amendment lawyers at the time were the guys that said they were the Second Amendment lawyers at the time. And there really were no guys that were good back then. But the guys who represented our side in the cases were just terrible and didn't know what they were talking about. But the reason that you and I are doing the podcast today, the founders were all gun smugglers. It's not like they went to Gun for Hire, or they went to Sure Shot, or they went to Bob's Sporting Goods and bought their muskets and Kentucky long rifles, and they had plenty of ammunition for everybody. They had to go steal it. And again, there is no better way to explain it than to tell you. I would compare it to the drug smugglers of today. These guys are going to do serious prison time. They're going to be put on a ship in New York Harbor and not be fed and sweat and freeze and probably die on that ship, or they're going to be hung if they're caught. But the king made a law that said there's no more importation of guns and powder, and they decided they were going to violate that law. It puts it a little bit into perspective what we got going on today, right? What do you have is your law coming out of the legislature right now that bothers you the most?
Oh, geez, the most. I mean, any of it, and that's something that always comes to my mind is at what point would we follow those same steps? At what point would we be essentially breaking into the state police barracks to steal firearms for the armed resistance? And it sounds like a crazy idea, but that's how our country was founded, and it was because of that they decided to write down the Second Amendment.
So where's the line?
Right.
Let's say Loretta gets the what we're going to call the New Jersey assault weapon ban, and they don't call it that, but they pretty much pick selected features of what constitutes an assault rifle, a detachable magazine that's not in the pistol grip, with a pistol grip, with a front grip, with a barrel,
Right.
You know the list. So let's say all ARs, even New Jersey compliant ARs that don't have a bayonet, which is absolutely ridiculous because a bayonet has been specified in the militia regulations since day one. Let's say ARs and AKs are banned. Does that do it, or are we put up with that? We probably put up with it, right?
Apparently. Yeah,
well,
we have,
we did.
right?
We did for 10 years, right? From 93.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about the mag ban?
And see, the question I have is where is the line, right? And I go back to this, and it's like I'm sure at the time there were people who were like, this is crazy, we can't resist the state. But then there was people who went and did it. But how do you organize people? How did you organize it then? And how do you?
Yeah, well, this is what I think. When I talk about the New Brunswick Guardian or the Constitutional Current, that was the Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram of the day.
Right.
Guys were sending newspapers from Connecticut to Virginia, and they're reading them. You get guys running around on horses all over the place, spreading the word, and that's how it gets together. But so here's my question: You don't think if they ban assault weapons that anybody's going to do anything, because we didn't do anything from 2004 from 94 to 2004. you don't think that anybody's going to do anything if we get the magazine ban down to 10 and it stays there, and the case that Schmutter and Bach have going right now loses. Now, I'm hearing some bravado from people about, hashtag I will not comply. So what happens if those two things pass? We lose the lawsuit for some bizarre reason in the Third Circuit, and for some bizarre reason the Supreme Court doesn't take up the mag ban. What stops New Jersey after that from saying, you know what, we think 10 is too many, we're going to put the limit at 6 and no more semi-automatic. Everything has to be a revolver. You think that does it? Well,
I think any of the things, and even some of the things that happened before, could do it or could have done it, but before... because what will happen is if you get people saying I will not comply, right? And there's a lot of people that didn't comply, right? There was almost no guns turned in during New Jersey's, right?
A lot of boating accidents.
Yeah. So, but then what happens? So then the state doesn't decide, okay, we're going to organize this massive confiscation. What they do instead, I was just talking to a guy from Canada the other day too. That they did the same thing. Nobody turned in their guns. What they do instead is they wait when you have an argument with your wife. Right? Or when your wife stabs you in the neck, right? And they arrest you because they found a gun that you were supposed to turn in 20 years ago and you didn't. Right? That happened to a 70-year-old guy in New Jersey. So that's what the state will do. But before any change can be the catalyst for the resistance, there has to be some organization and some planning. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just going to be one individual saying, I'm going to make a stand. Right. Then he gets taken out, labeled a terrorist, and
Well, here's the problem that I see. So let's go back to, I said, if they get confident because the magazine ban stands and the Supreme Court won't take the case, and they get the AR ban, and again, just like the last what was it, binder up? What was the last assault weapon case that the Supreme Court didn't take? Anyway. Let's say they're confident because the Supreme Court doesn't take those two, so they knock us down to no more semi-automatic handguns. We can only have revolvers. No more semi-automatic rifles. You got to have bolt action. No more detachable magazines, period. Does that do it? I don't know, because you know what? I like my job. I like my family. Do I want to go risk everything I have to get my magazine-fed weapon back? Do I want to risk everything I have to get my magazine back? The problem is, are we going to become castrated so much, right? They're going to cut off our left hand, and then they're going to cut off our right hand, and they're going to cut off our right foot, and then they're going to cut off our left foot. At the end of it all, is there going to be anything left to actually fight with?
Right.
Yeah. Right. I don't think when Hamilton went and attacked a battery to steal the cannon, we know he didn't go in there with a cannon, but he probably had a revolver or a musket with him, right? He had something more than just his fist to take on the two sentries that are working there. So it's very interesting to see how far this thing's going to go. I think there's. It seems to me, and people, you're on New Jersey Firearms Syndicate, right?
Yes.
In Facebook. All right. So I catch a lot of heat because I tell people, nothing happened for 40 years. Zero happened, right? From Burton and Sicardi until 2008, nothing happened. Nothing positive, anyway. Heller comes out in 2008. And, of course, the state cherry picks stuff out of Heller that's completely inconsistent with the Heller decision. And so when Heller came out was right in between my Superior Court case for my handgun carry permit and my appeals court case. My appeals court argument was exactly what Heller ended up saying, but they told me that the Second Amendment didn't apply to the state of New Jersey. Boom, case over, I'm done. So then they come up with Heller's an in the home case, right? And that's what the Cheeseman-Gillard case are fighting. Really, that's all they have. The other thing they try to pull, they love to cherry pick that word long-standing and presumptively lawful, which I think is from note 2425 in Heller. This is nothing in our decision cast doubt on long-standing and presumptively lawful regulations. The problem is, we could do another hour. I can tell you exactly where the Sicardi rule came from. It's not presumptively lawful. It's completely illegal. I told you this in the last time.
Right. Yeah.
It's an illegal rule. But listen, when Justice Jacobs actually says in Sicardi that the standard of need is not frozen in time as of 1924, that it's the judge's job to interpret the legislation and then apply it in light of the circumstances and times. And when I say apply it in light of circumstances and the times, that's a quote. And Justice Jacobs cites himself in a case called Gleitman v. Cosgrove. Gleitman v. Cosgrove is a medical malpractice suit over an abortion. And when he comes up with that definition, which is actually in the dictionary, he's not applying Second Amendment law to the Sicardi rule. He's implying medical malpractice and abortion law to the Sicardi rule. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But he did do us a favor, because by him saying that need varies with the person and need varies with the times, he basically admits that need is decided on a case-by-case basis. And as I told you, that's the crux of the Cheeseman-Gillard case, is that the Sicardi rule is decided on a case-by-case basis. But what I'm getting at is that the law has been illegal since 1971, but really nothing happened from 71 to 2008. Then 2010 rolls around, we get McDonald, and nobody's too happy with McDonald because they said it doesn't do anything for us. That's ridiculous. McDonald is huge, because now all of a sudden it doesn't matter. They can't come back and say New Jersey doesn't have a Second Amendment written in its state constitution, because we do. Now McDonald now applies Heller to us. Now applies the Second Amendment to us. This case, Catano, is enormous for us. Now, Catano, as you know, is a taser case.
Right.
So most people on Syndicate give me a hard time, but two really important things in Catano. First of all, Jamie Catano is outside of work, which means she's in public. She's not in the home. She's outside the home. She's in her parking lot at work, clearly in public. So the fact that they didn't even discuss in the home with Jamie Catano, the Supreme Court of the United States overturned the Supreme Court of Massachusetts and said they're flat out wrong. But the other thing Catano did for us is that one of the New Jersey arguments, one of the New Jersey talking points for years and years and years has been that the Sicardi rule is interest balancing, that guns are dangerous weapons, and we're making a decision on the public safety when we decide gun permits. Well, what Catano did was explain that Massachusetts used dangerous and unusual weapon to throw out Catano's claim for the Second Amendment, for her protection. And what the Supreme Court did in Catano was say, listen, we've already told you in Heller guns are dangerous. We know guns are dangerous. Whether they're dangerous or not has nothing to do with Second Amendment protections. We all know they're dangerous. For a gun to be unusual, and that's why that whole in common use, the whole Miller, does it help in the militia is so important. Basically what Catano said is, if you can buy it with a 2C58-3, and there's some exceptions in New Jersey, I would say if you can buy it with a 2C58-3 in Florida, it's legal. It's legal to 2C58-4 carry it. And what I mean by that is, and unless the weapon is like the Death Star from Star Wars that wipes out a whole planet, unless the weapon is something like some laser beam that blows up an entire building, it's not unusual. Everybody knows that weapons are dangerous, but it has to be unusual. It can't be commercially available for people to buy. And it's not just in New Jersey. Like, we can start to say in 47 or 45 other states, let's just pick a gun. Let's pick this how about this FN-57 handgun that holds 20 rounds in a magazine?
Right.
Not particularly my first choice for a handgun, but
right.
It's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You could say that's unusual because it really shoots a PDW round and not a sub round. Call that unusual, but it's not unusual because 45 other states it's legal for sale.
Right.
If you can prove that the Coast Guard uses it, if you could prove that the Marines use it, if you could prove that a police department uses it, it contributes to the militia, and you can carry it. So Katana was huge because New Jersey's trying to make the whole. New Jersey has two claims. Heller was in the home. That they use that in Cheeseman, and guns are dangerous, and urgent necessity weighs the public safety on allowing a dangerous weapon into public. They use that at Gillard and Cheeseman. So both of those have been thrown out by Catano. And so the way I see it, how old are you?
I am 42.
Okay. I'm 51 today.
Yep.
I'm 9 years older than you. The way I see it is this thing's starting to snowball our way, right? We got Heller in 2008. Nothing happens for 2 years. We get McDonald. Boom. A couple of years ago, we get Catano. And now, if you start to look in the circuits, right? All of a sudden, we're starting to see that the magazine bans in other circuits are being overturned. We're starting to see that the assault weapon bans are starting to be overturned. People are starting the scholarship. And when I say the scholarship, I'm not talking about the liberal law reviews. I'm talking about guys who go against academia that are writing really solid, good historical scholarship on Second Amendment history and then applying Heller. That scholarship is starting to go our way. These guys are saying, look, Heller's right. This is what it means. It basically means, this is the way I'm reading it. If Ben Franklin bought cannon, we can buy cannon.
Yes.
If I want a saw, I should be able to have a saw. That's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah.
I don't think that the machine gun, the NFA, is actually a ban. It's a tax stamp, and it was just designed. It was the exact same thing that the need provision in 2C58-4 was. It was designed to have Al Capone come in and have to apply for a tax stamp to get a machine gun, because if they couldn't get him on bootlegging, they could get him for carrying a Tommy gun, and that's all it was designed for. And it was also designed, really, it was designed
$200 was a lot of money.
Back then, back then, my wife and your wife aren't letting you buy a $200 tax stamp to get a Tommy gun, which is now going to cost you $7,000 to buy. Right. So, I mean, but that's the way I'm reading it. So this is what it looks like to me. And eventually, if the Cheeseman and Gillard case doesn't win, the St. George Tucker story will come out in the court brief, because eventually one of these guys is going to be stupid enough to cite him, and once they do, he'll get crushed on it. Because I actually have Henry Tucker's letters. I have Ben Franklin's letters. I have all the founders. I have all their letters. So I can make a copy of St. George Tucker, Henry Tucker's letter saying St. George was responsible for the powder theft and rolled a few barrels of powder, and put it in the appendix, and anybody who cites Tucker is going to look stupid.
Nice. Well, Jay, I thank you so much. I got enough here for 3 episodes. I'm going to
it again.
Yeah. But
all right.
I'm sure you got more stuff, so I'd love to have you on again soon.
Okay.
All right.
I'll figure out something good for the next one.
All right. I hope you enjoy your birthday.
Back on.
Yeah. All right.
Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Talk to you. Bye.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 74 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Please head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com/74, where you'll find links to our affiliate sponsors. You can help out the show by using the Amazon link there at no additional cost to yourself, and you'll also find links to Liberty Classroom, where you get the history and economics they didn't teach you in high school, and to Liberty Maniacs, where you can get some really great pro-gun, pro-2A gear, and thanks for tuning in. Out of Order James Kalita. Please remember to like and review, subscribe and review, and let your friends know about this podcast. Out of Order James Kalita. We'll see you next time.